Well, it's really a story that's become a legend. You've heard it being referenced in the sports world, like in 1980 when the U.S. men's hockey team defeated the Soviet Union in what became known as the Miracle on Ice. You heard it in Super Bowl 42 when the Giants put super glue on David Tyree's helmet and the Giants were able to defeat the previously undefeated New England Patriots. But it's even referenced in the political world, like all the way back in 1948 when Harry Truman defeated Thomas Dewey, and the Chicago Tribune had actually already printed the headline predicting Dewey to defeat Truman. And it was an election that shocked the entire nation. But it's not just in the political world. It's used in all kinds of different categories, like when Airbnb took on the entire hotel chain market and no one thought that they could overcome the odds and they could truly be successful, or when Netflix decided to start mailing out DVDs and took on the giant known as Blockbuster. But it's also a story that has inspired countless other stories that have even gripped our hearts, whether we realize that this was kind of the inspiration, like when Frodo went against Sauron in The Lord of the Rings, or like when Katniss Everdeen took on the Capitol in the Hunger Games, even Rocky Balboa taking on Apollo Creed, the greatest of them all. You probably guessed because I've talked about it a lot lately. Harry Potter taking on Voldemort. It's a story that we know that has been the inspiration of all of these different stories. And it's a story that is so powerful. It's that story of David and Goliath, of the seasoned warrior against the young shepherd, experience versus youth, a giant versus a little kid. It's a powerful story. And it was a story of overwhelming odds. It was a story of an unexpected defeat. Unexpected for everybody that was watching except David and the God that he served. But what I want us to think about this morning, what we're going to get into, is it's not a story about us. It's not about us at all. But it is a story for us. And that's what I want us to understand today. So if you got your Bible, I'd love for you to join me in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going through this series on the life of David called It's Complicated, because David is one of the most complicated people in all of the Bible, and we are complicated ourselves, right? If you're living with a complicated person, just say amen. Everybody should have said amen, because we're all living with complicated people because we are complicated, right? Every one of us is complicated. And we're following a God, we're loving a God who loves complicated people. And what we're going to see today is that we're all dealing with giants of some type, inside and without. Yet, what I hope you'll understand by the time that we're done today is that the battle that we're fighting has already been won. And that if we can learn and understand that, it will change how we view the challenges that we're facing. So here's what it said in 1 Samuel 17. Talks about Goliath, this Philistine champion from Gath. He came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel, because you have Israel on one mountainside, you have the Philistine army encamped on the other, and they're prepared to do battle. There's this valley right in between them, but Goliath walks out, and he's over 9 feet tall. He's got on a bronze helmet. He's got on this bronze coat of mail, meaning this chest protector. It weighs 125 pounds. He's got bronze leg armor, and he's carrying a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was heavy and as thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that alone weighed 15 pounds. And he's got this armor bearer walking out in front of him carrying a shield. The writer of 1 Samuel 17 wants you to understand this is a strong dude. He is gigantic, and more than just being tall, he is extremely strong, and he is a great seasoned fighter. In fact, he's the champion of the Philistines. He's the best warrior that they have. And so he stood and he shouted to the Israelites. He said, "Why are you coming out to fight? I am the Philistine champion, but you're only the servants of Saul." He just made like a y'all ain't that important kind of joke. "Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, we'll be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves." So there's a lot on the line here, right? If you are brave enough to go fight this giant and you lose, you will be hated by the entire nation of Israel forever, because now You are responsible for why you and your descendants are going to be slaves. And everyone in the Israelite army, including their king, who according to the Bible was head and shoulders above every other person, even he was too afraid to fight. And so they just stood there day after day, listening to this giant taunt them, living in fear. Until one day, this young shepherd shows up, and it's almost like he's sent by his dad on a DoorDash delivery because he's bringing supplies to his brothers. And he sees this giant, he hears what he says, and he's wondering why no one has stepped up to do anything about it. And so he volunteers. And here's what he wound up saying. He said, your servant, talking about himself, David, has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine is just like one of them. David points out something so profound. In fact, we looked at it last week, that it was that time in the field as a shepherd that prepared David for this next moment. It was that very ordinary moment of being in the field day after day, caring for these sheep, that was going to prepare him for this extraordinary moment of facing this giant. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the paw of this Philistine as well. And so Saul is like, oh my goodness, we're going to lose, but maybe God will be with you, right? That's the edited version you didn't read, but you could understand his mindset. He's like, nobody else is going to go. I guess let's send the kid, and, eventually maybe we'll be delivered from the hand of the Philistines at some point. But David had a different tactic. He wasn't going to go fight this giant on the giant's terms. And so he grabbed his staff, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the brook. He put them in his shepherd's pouch, and he took his sling and he approached the Philistine. And David said to the Philistine, coming with his sword and with a spear, with a javelin, but I'm coming to you with the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you defy. And I just want you and all of my people who are too afraid, and all the Philistines, everybody needs to understand that God does not save with the sword and the spear, because it's his battle, and he's going to take care of everything today. Then David put his hand in his bag, took out that stone, put it in the sling, and slung it around and around and round and round. You remember the song, and round and round and round and round? And he launched that stone, and it struck the giant right in between the eyes. And he fell on his face to the ground. And David prevailed, and there was not a sword in his hand. It's a powerful story. A few years ago, I read a book by an author named Malcolm Gladwell called David and Goliath. It's a story about misfits and underdogs. It's a really interesting read. I'm not saying I agree with everything in the book. I just thought it was really interesting because Malcolm Gladwell points out some things in his book that I've never considered with the story of David and Goliath. And one of the things that he talked about is that Goliath, being a giant, very possibly had this medical condition that impaired his vision. And so here he is, this giant of a man, strong, athletic, but if he doesn't have good vision, he needs to engage in close hand-to-hand combat. One of the things that's always been weird to me about the story of David and Goliath is here is this giant, the champion fighter, and who's with him? An armor bearer. Why does he have an armor bearer with him if he's the champion fighter? Is it possible that this armor bearer is the one who has to lead him down into the battle, and then once someone gets close, then he's able to see? I don't know. That's pure speculation. I just thought it was really interesting. But another thing that Gladwell points out in his book is that everyone looking at this battle assumes that David is outmatched. Everyone but David and God, the God that he served. But it's not just because of what we fixate on. It's because we think that David has to fight Goliath on Goliath's terms. But David goes a different route. And sometimes when we're children, we're learning this story, and maybe you're even given a smooth stone to remember the story of David and Goliath. And they gave you a little pebble, and you're like, well, looky there. That little pebble just took out that giant. When you read pebble, don't think like teeny tiny pebble. Think softball, because David is a slinger. And what we know about slingers is they had these pouches. It's not a slingshot like you're shooting at birds. This is like a leather strap with a little pocket, and they would sling it around and around. They had the ability to launch these rocks upwards of 90 to 100 miles per hour. Can you imagine? I don't care how large of an individual you are, getting struck right between the eyes with a softball that was hurled 90 to 100 miles per hour. I don't think any of us are going to survive that, much less a giant. And so by David maintaining proper distance, yet having a weapon that the giant could not stop, because it's possible he never saw it coming. Literally, never saw it coming with bad vision. David was not outmatched, not to mention what everyone else thought was a weakness of David's, being young, being more agile, being athletic, was actually to his advantage. When you reframe this story, you actually start to look and go, Goliath never had a shot. And it's not just because God was on David's side. That is what sets this story apart. But it reminds us of some different situations in the Bible. And a really powerful lesson that I want us to understand this morning is that this story about David and Goliath is not about us. Not at all, because you nor I are David. We're not staring down our own giants, and we're not going to defeat our own giants. This is a story about Jesus. Because if we were to find ourselves in the story, do not look at yourself as the hero in the story. If we're in this story, we're in one of two places. We're either in the crowd of people standing on the sideline, too afraid to engage in the battle, or we're so foolish and proud and arrogant that we think we can walk down into the valley and we will lose that battle every time. This is a story about Jesus, because Jesus is the better David. David becomes this, what's called a type of Jesus Christ, meaning like a shadow. When we look at the life of David, especially in this story, we're seeing a prefigure of who Jesus was going to be. And you just think about the similarities between their two stories. Here is Israel paralyzed by fear, and yet every human being is paralyzed by fear caused by sin and death, unable to get out of our own way because of our own sin. Here is this formidable foe that seems to be unbeatable, just like sin and death and Satan. Yet David was willing to volunteer and take on that giant, just like Jesus surrendered his life and overcame sin and death and Satan. And it seemed a battle that would never be won with David facing the giant. And it seemed like David was against the greatest odds until you reframe it and go, actually, I think David was well positioned to win this battle. Just like Jesus, everyone in his life thought he had lost when he went to the cross, until you reframe it and see the cross in the proper light to go, wait a minute, what seemed like a sure loss was a guaranteed victory. And Jesus is the one who slung the final stone and sunk our greatest enemy, sin and death. You read 1 Corinthians 15, that great enemy of death was finally defeated so that we have hope. This is a story about Jesus, the true David. And when we read it that way, now we can understand that this is actually a story for us, but reading it through the eyes of Jesus. Because yes, we have challenges, we have obstacles. We'll talk about those in just a minute. But when we see them through the eyes of Jesus, when we realize that we are not fighting for victory, we are fighting from a place of victory, because the battle has already been won. Jesus has already secured the victory that we need, and now we are in a position of victory, finishing these last few battles that we have in this life. It reframes how we view every challenge, because it's not about me. It's not about my strength. It's not about my ability to take out this giant. It's already been done. Jesus has already won the battle. Now it's about using his strength to ensure the victory in my own life. So let's look at a couple things I think we can learn from this story. The first one is that everyone is in a battle. I heard it said years ago, there's a need on every row. And that is so true. Every row in this auditorium, there's a need, probably multiple needs on every row. But just like that statement is true, in every heart that is sitting in this room or watching online, there's a battle taking place in every heart. Every one of us, maybe we're not staring down a 9-foot-tall giant, but every one of us is dealing with some type of battle. Not on a battlefield that people can see. It's not like the story of David and Goliath where all these people are watching and there's this valley and all eyes are down on the valley going, look at that battle taking place. Most of our battles are taking place in a place that no one can see because it's a battle within the heart. And maybe it's a battle of expectations, a battle against a giant of pressure, of criticism that you're dealing with at work or at home. Maybe it's a battle of financial hardship, of some health-related issues. Maybe it's a battle of addiction. Maybe it's a battle of shame. And the thing about it is some of the battles that we're fighting are from external forces. And they call out just like Goliath, and they're challenging our identity. They're challenging our self-worth. But some of those battles are internal. They're just coming from within us, not necessarily from outside forces. Things like shame and regret and anxiety and depression. Giants within us that we find ourselves battling. And it brings about a loss of self-worth and self-esteem and self-confidence. And we walk through life suppressing these battles or trying to hide that we're fighting them because maybe you feel alone in it. But everyone's in a battle of some type. And that's why it's so important that we remember that we are not fighting in our own ability, that we are standing in the strength of Jesus Christ, not in our own strength. Because if we are to stand in our own strength, we are going to lose. We are going to completely be destroyed. David teaches us that you don't have to be the strongest or the most experienced. You just need a heart that's confident in who God is. But we sometimes feel like we're not strong enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not spiritual enough. But God's not looking for the smartest or the strongest. He's just looking for the surrender. Here's a couple of passages that I find so powerful. Zechariah 4 and verse 6 says, "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord Almighty." That is where our strength truly comes from. Think about Psalms 20 verse 7. Some trust in chariots, some trust in horses. I love this verse because as a teenager, we sang a song, a little devotional song growing up about this verse right here. But we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And it just made me think this morning, like, what are some of the things we find ourselves trusting in? If the word chariots was just an empty blank and the word horses was just an empty blank, because I doubt you're trusting in a chariot today. Maybe you do trust in a horse. I have no idea. Maybe you're old school and you're like, you know what, automobiles getting too expensive. Going to buy the horse. Hate to tell you they're getting expensive too. But what do we trust in? Is it some trust in a bank account or a retirement fund? Some trust in their own ability, their own strength. Some trust in youth or invincibility. Some trust in a government, a political figure or party. Some are trusting in a family member, a parent, a grandparent, a spiritual hero. I don't know where you've placed your trust. If it's anywhere other than, as the last line says, I just threw my remote, in the name of the Lord our God, then whatever it is that's in the blank will bring about defeat, no matter how strong we think it is, because that's the only place we can trust to receive the victory that's been won for us is in the name of the Lord. And so, what I want to remind you of before you leave is that the battle is won before you get on the battlefield. So the story of David is so powerful because we love that moment that David walks out onto the battlefield. He's got his sling in hand, he's got his pouch ready to go, and he's got courage in his heart. But that's not where the battle began. You see, for David, he tells us that the battle began not on the battlefield, but in a different field that was filled with sheep, where no one was around. No one was watching, just him and the Lord. And it reminds me, and it should remind us, that the battles we face today will not be won in the moments in which we are presently fighting, but they will be won in the moments in which we prepared ourselves for them. Because you think about these challenges that we are going through. Before David fought Goliath publicly, he's fighting off lions and bears privately. Before he took a stand before an army, he's kneeling before God in obscurity. Before the sling ever flew, his heart was being shaped in solitude. Because the battles that matter the most are won in moments that no one sees. They're won in daily prayers. They're won in daily faithfulness to the Lord. The courage that you need is going to be built in a prayer closet. The strength you're going to need in the crisis is going to be formed in your consistency of worship. The faith to face what is coming is forged in the faithfulness of what is right in front of you. So a couple of examples. A healthy marriage is not built on a wedding day or on an anniversary trip. It's built in the daily choices of sacrifice and listening and forgiving and serving one another. Integrity at work is formed when no one's looking. It's doing the right thing when you know you'll never be rewarded and you probably won't even get noticed. Parenting wins are not just in those milestone moments where everything is perfect and you pat yourself on the back and say, "Good job, Dad. Good job, Mom." They're in the late night talks, the consistent presence, the I love yous after a really hard day. Purity is not just about saying no in the moment of temptation. It's about saying yes to the kind of person you want to be long before that kind of pressure shows up. You see, the little moments of trust lead to the big moments of victory. Just to give you a for example, Caitlin Clark and Steph Curry are probably two of the best basketball shooters on the planet. And they're not the best basketball shooters on the planet because they're the luckiest. It's because they have taken thousands upon thousands of shots that no one has seen because they've been in empty gyms. So that when all the lights are shining bright, when all the cameras are shuttering, when all the people pull out their phones to record this moment of history, the ball goes in the basket not because they were lucky, but because of the thousands of hours they spent when no one was watching. And that's the same reminder to us. And so my question for you is, what kind of challenge or obstacle are you facing right now? What kind of pressure are you dealing with? What kind of situation is feeling so heavy on you? You need to understand that you can be successful. You can overcome that crisis. You can get through that obstacle, not because you are strong, but because you serve a God who has already won the battle that you are currently facing. Your strength is not on you. It's not in your ability to overcome. It's in the God you trust who will give you everything that you need. So if you're here today and you are struggling, you're feeling worn down, quit trying to fight on your own and learn to surrender and to trust. Because as David told us, as we're going to sing in just a moment, the battle belongs to the Lord. It is His. He has already won it. You and I stand in a position of victory. And we can look at our problems. We can look at our challenges. We can look at that enemy of sin and death. We can tell Satan himself, Jesus has won, and I'm trusting in Him. Today, if you've never received that victory because you've never been baptized into Christ, I just want to encourage you. What are you waiting for? Today can be the greatest day of your life, or you can make the greatest decision of your life to receive the greatest victory that's ever been won. And it wasn't a situation where Jesus was outmatched. It wasn't a situation where the odds were against Him. Everything was working in Jesus' favor because everything was according to God's plan. He went to the cross, He gave His life, He was raised from the dead, and He sits at the right hand of God as the reigning King so that we can surrender to Him and be blessed by Him and receive victory from Him. Today, if you need the prayers of the shepherds of this church, you want us to pause as a church family and to pray over you, to remind you of your strength that needs to be found in the Lord, to encourage you in your walk with the Lord, to trust in Him. We'd love to encourage you however we can. Please let us know as together we stand and sing.